had a lot of episodes of like disassociation, not being myself in my head. Like I just don't feel like myself. But I always was able to manage or prevent the episodes via these like mental sequences I would do in my head, visualizations, specific like sequence of words. And for whatever reason, that just completely broke down. And I experienced the most intense episode of dissociation that I ever have in my life. I needed to seek, professional inpatient help.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Please Excuse My OCD. My name is Tyler, and I'm so happy to be here with my friend Elysse Lescarbeau. She is an OCD advocate. She is an OCD survivor and a mental well-being coach. And I'm so happy to have her on to talk about her experiences, what she's been up to, a different point of view when it comes to the mental health community, and also being able to deal with OCD in multiple different ways. And I'm excited to dive in and get to know a little bit more about her and what she's up to. So, disclaimer, we are just two people trying to raise awareness on OCD and anxiety. And as always, if you are struggling, this should not take place of professional therapy. So please seek advice from a mental health professional. Elysse, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Tyler. I'm excited.
Awesome. Me too. Yeah, I've been following you for quite some time. I'm not sure if it was me that followed you or you followed me, but like somewhere along the
Yeah.
lines, social media crossed. And I love your content. I love how outspoken you are. I love how honest and raw you are. I was watching one of your stories. It was probably a month ago where you were having a really hard time, and I was like,
Yeah.
not that I love that you're having a hard time. I love that you're authentic
Yeah.
and honest with it, because that's
Yeah.
that's truly a powerful thing to do on social media when it's everyone's highlight reel.
Right.
Um, and so I just want to learn a little bit more about your story, your relationship with anxiety and OCD, just to start off.
Yeah, totally. So I would say my relationship with OCD and kind of like the start of all of this could be traced back to me sitting in a hospital room in September of 2022 at Mass General Hospital. I had just gotten back from a 2-week trip to Europe with my partner at the time. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. We had planned for months and months. And I had a lot of episodes of like disassociation. Like I kind of just referred to it as like not being myself in my head. Like I just don't feel like myself for like years, probably since preteen years, if not even before that. But I always was able to manage or prevent the episodes via these like mental sequences I would do in my head, visualizations, specific like sequence of words. And for whatever reason in Europe, that just completely broke down. And I experienced the most intense episode of dissociation that I ever have in my life, to the point that when we got back, my parents and my partner and I decided that I needed to seek, professional inpatient help. So that kind of led me to being in this hospital room. And up until this point, like I had other diagnoses that I think were a result of this dissociation, just kind of like almost the effects of it. So when I was 14, I was diagnosed with depression, generalized anxiety disorder, and bipolar 1. Was actually hospitalized at the time and just kind of like put into talk therapy on and off. Nothing ever really like worked. I kept sort of doing all of these things, but I kept them completely secret because I genuinely thought it was just me, hence my Instagram OCD or just me. And I just thought my brain was like defunct and just thought like, this is like my cross to bear in life. And like, this is it. So I had never been honest about my symptoms and what I was doing in my head. And I remember sitting in this hospital room and just being like, what the fuck do I have to lose, honestly? Like, I candidly like would have rather been dead. And I was like, if she looks at me, this doctor, and says like, you're crazy and I'm committing you, like I was going to a hospital regardless. So I was like, I have nothing to lose at this point. Like, I'm just going to be honest. And instead of, saying, oh, you're crazy, she looked at me and said the words that would forever change my life, which was, have you ever considered that you have OCD? And I had not. I had
Wow.
not at all. Like literally, I was like, at first I was like, what are you talking about? And then I went back to the waiting room and was like Googling, what OCD even really was. Cause my interpretation of OCD, like many, many other people, like was it's cleaning, it's symmetry, it's checking, it's all very
Yep.
physical symptoms. There's nothing, mental that you could just be doing. Like just nothing like what I was going through. And the first thing I stumbled across was an article about pure O, which like I have some qualms about pure O because I don't really think anyone doesn't have compulsions and only has purely obsessions that has OCD.
Hmm.
But it explained it as like purely mental. And I was like, the hell? Like I literally was
What
just
is
like,
this?
ooh, like mind blown. Like it was describing exactly what I was going through. Like,
Yeah.
having these things that you're trying to avoid that are really upsetting, like obsessive thoughts. For me, it was the idea of like disassociating and then doing, rituals, in my case, entirely mental rituals to try to prevent that thing or like try to gain relief from that thought. And that's what I had
Yes.
been doing for basically my entire life and had no idea that it was one, diagnosable, and two, treatable. So that was the light bulb moment for sure. It's like I kind of look at my life as like before that moment and after that moment, and like I'm and after that moment, and I'm much better for it. So I
Yes.
ended up being hospitalized. I got on the right medications. Like I had a really great doctor in the hospital that wasn't an OCD specialist, but she was able to put me on like the correct medications for OCD. And then I luckily had the honestly resources to get an amazing OCD therapist, which is not something that a lot of people can say, and was truly a blessing because it's very difficult to find someone that's actually truly qualified to treat OCD.
Yes.
So the first thing she actually shared with me and told me to purchase was this book called The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris. And Russ Harris, for anyone that doesn't know, is a pioneer in the acceptance and commitment therapy community. And he wrote this book and it changed my life. So I primarily did ACT for my treatment. There's a component of exposure in ACT, like it
Yep.
absolutely highlights and focuses on doing scary things. It's not quite as like specific with ERP, where it's like,
Hmm.
you necessarily need to make a hierarchy and kind of like your anxiety needs to go down by half or whatever, and like that type of stuff. But it definitely still focuses on exposure.
Hmm.
I am someone that was basically being triggered 24/7 because I just like existing in my own head was a trigger. So I actually ended up recovering quite quickly. I think because I just had so many opportunities for exposure. And
Gotcha.
then from that point, like I just became obsessed, to use it ironically, with like acceptance and commitment therapy, ERP, like just learning everything I could about this stuff. And I had this realization, which is, I think, kind of what you're talking about that maybe sets me apart a little bit in the OCD community, which is like, I don't focus necessarily entirely on OCD awareness. It's something I'm very passionate about. But
Hmm.
I focus on the fact that these techniques, specifically ACT and ERP, can literally help anybody who is anxious live a better life. And I just think that that's like such an important piece, not only because it will help people with OCD, people with anxiety, but just, or diagnosed anxiety, but just people that are anxious generally. But it also helps to bring people into the community. And I definitely
Hmm.
still talk about OCD. I'm writing a book about it. Like it's something I feel really passionately about, getting out awareness. But I do feel like it's important to kind of bring in other people and have them see, like, one, what this disorder is, but two, like the treatment concepts from this disorder are so fucking powerful
Yep.
and can literally help anyone. So that's kind of my spiel and what I'm trying to
I think that's
do.
wonderful. And thank you
Thank
for being
you.
so open about your story and to hear that it's so recent too. I mean, within the past
Yeah.
few years, is
Hmm.
astonishing to see how much you're doing in the community and really getting involved in that way. I think is huge. So, one, thank you for that. Two, I would love for you to text me the name of that book again because I want to
Yeah.
read that. Um,
Yes.
and it's interesting, like let's go back a little bit to you know your story, and then I have a few other questions after that. But and this is just my brain because I kind of work the same way. when you were, on this trip of a lifetime with your partner, you're in a different country, you're supposed to be, enjoying this trip, right? Do you think that being away from home played a part into like how that like catalyst exploded for you?
Yeah, I think part of it was that. And then I think the other part of it is like that classic sort of paradox within OCD and anxiety, where it's like the more that you want something, the harder it is to get it. So the more that you
Yeah.
put pressure on yourself to like feel a certain way, the more that you're not going to feel that way. So yeah, I definitely think that was a factor. Like, this is a trip of a lifetime. Like, I'm supposed to be having
Hmm.
this romantic getaway. And I just wanted that so, so bad to the point that I was basically sabotaging myself unintentionally. So I definitely think that had an impact for sure.
Gotcha. That makes perfect sense. Just as an outsider listening, because I know like when we talk about disassociation, depersonalization,
Yeah.
these really scary, not dangerous, but scary um, feelings or sensations that, if you don't know what it is, it's very terrifying. If you do, it's a different ball game, because once you're accustomed to like, oh, this is what it is,
Yeah.
it's going to be uncomfortable, but you got to ride it out.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't talk about that side of extreme anxiety, where you feel, well, at least for me personally, I would feel like I was not in my body. I felt like everything around me was like fake or like painting like. um and I think for you, talking about how that you had a few of these episodes that was the worst for you when you were overseas. What do you mean by that, that it was the worst it's ever been for you?
Yeah. So yeah, I would experience these episodes like constantly. It's really interesting that you kind of asked that question about like, what was it about being overseas that triggered it? Because I think there was just so many examples of where it was in moments that I wanted something to go well that I ended up having these episodes. So like when I was trying to take tests, I like literally couldn't go on dates. Like the fact that I ever had a boyfriend was like a miracle. Um, and like just any moments, like I wanted someone to like me or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things would trigger this sabotaging thing in my head that would, yeah, lead to such extreme anxiety that I would disassociate. And um, when I was in Europe, I just think it was the fact that I had no control. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
typically when these things happened, I was able to do my mental rituals. And for the most part, that worked, right? Like, it worked in the
Yeah.
short term.
Right.
It was keeping me stuck. I didn't know, but it
Mm-hmm.
worked in the short term. But for whatever reason, it just stopped working. So it was like I just kept going down this rabbit hole of like, and this is for any emotion or thought, right? You get upset and then you start thinking about how upset you are. And then that makes you more upset. And then you feel ashamed. And then you feel guilty. And then you feel like, you're a terrible person. Something's wrong with you. And it just like goes down this
Yeah.
like rabbit hole. And I had been able to sort of like stop the rabbit hole with like doing these mental rituals. But for whatever reason, that didn't happen. And it's also interesting that you talk about, not knowing what it is. Like, I say I got diagnosed with OCD and it was like my life before, my life after, but I didn't even know that I had DPDR, depersonalization derealization disorder, until like 6 months later, when I was just talking to someone on Instagram. She was like, yeah, that's DPDR, because we were like talking about our symptoms and ICBT and ERP and stuff. And I was like, what? Like, I didn't even
Yeah.
know that. So it's also like just like such a like mind fuck of like what
Yeah.
is like it's like multiple layers of like I didn't even know I had OCD, but then I didn't even know I had DPGR. And I think that's such a poorly understood disorder as well. So
Yes.
I think all that is to say, like, there's different levels of anxiety where you feel like you're disassociating. But when it
Mm-hmm.
gets to the point where, like you were saying, you feel like you're in a dream state,
Mm-hmm.
for me, it was like I felt like I lost my personality and was just like a shell, like a zombie walking around. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I remember we were walking around a museum and I literally could not, like, it was like the Van Gogh Museum. Like, this is some of the most amazing art
Wow.
in the world, right? Like Starry
Yeah.
Night. Like, and I literally could not give a shit. But then I was upset about the fact that I
Wow.
couldn't be, you know what I mean? So it was just like,
Yeah.
it was just a complete and utter remoteness from myself, is like the best way I can describe it.
And it's so ironic because just like OCD, anxiety, all of these different disorders, it's the brain's way of trying to protect us. It's like, oh, we're going to pull you
Right.
back a couple scales so that you don't,
Yep.
so you're not so traumatized. And like you're really like, well,
Yeah.
there's nothing going on. Like, what the fuck am I traumatized about? But like, I am
Yeah.
trauma. Like, yeah, it's a mess. And I'm so glad that you brought up the mental compulsions, like the mental side, the mental obsessions, like these people often think that like OCD is very just physical. Oh, I got to tap the desk or I got to do this and that.
Right.
And including myself, I thought that as well until my doctor was like, you've been performing compulsions in your head for your forever. Like, because I would
Right.
explain to him like what I do with certain things, um, in my head when I get a thought and what I say to that thought. And it's like, it's such an elusive thing. And and OCD itself can also be so different from person to person, right? So it's
Hmm.
like how did their compulsions line up with what I'm doing? How are they the same? I think that the biggest thing at the end of the day is being able to look at the safety behaviors and being able to look at the
Hmm.
way the brain's relationship is with the anxiety. And
Yep.
so you did bring up ACT a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, and we hear a lot about ERP and ICBT and these different forms of working through OCD. But can you tell me a little bit more about ACT and like what exactly that entails?
Yes, this is my favorite topic. I love ACT so freaking much. I genuinely think ACT should be like required learning for every person in the world because it's not meant, so just starting off, it's not a specific therapy that's meant to treat like OCD or
Hmm.
anxiety or depression. It's almost more of like a framework for life than it is like meant to treat something specific. It has seen success across addiction, trauma, like PTSD, OCD, anxiety, depression, like so many different domains. And I think the reason for that is because it really addresses the whole person. It's not just talking about, let's do exposure, let's
Hmm.
habituate you. Okay, bye. It's like, let's take your life and figure out how we can make this better. So, the three sort of tenets of ACT, and there's a couple of things underneath each, is be present, open up, and do what matters. So
Hmm.
within be present, there's the idea of cognitive diffusion, which is basically seeing your thoughts as separate from you, seeing your emotions as separate from you, not getting caught up in them, not getting hooked by them, and like letting them sort of jerk you around.
Hmm.
And then the second piece is acceptance. So that's something I talk about all the time. And it's really the willingness to experience difficult emotions without going down paths of either experiential avoidance where you're trying to like avoid that or using coping mechanisms to try to get rid of it. So that's really the idea of that's open up. Sorry, not be present. That's open
Sure.
up, which is really about like opening up to your experience. And then be present is sort of like I think you can kind of do them in any order too, which is really cool. It's like a nonlinear model. Be present. The two tenets there are being like grounded in the present moment. So getting off of autopilot mode, really seeing your experience as something, that you can observe rather than just like think your way through and do
Hmm.
your way through. It's really about like they call it either the observing mode or the noticing mode, where you're taking that sense of self that's sort of above all of the noise and the content and just kind of seeing life for what it is. And then there's a flexible self concept. So it's about the idea of not being so tied to like your idea of sense of self, of like, this is who I am.
Hmm.
It can be negative or positive, right? Like, I am the best person in the world, or like, I'm the worst person in the world. Like, it could be anything, but it's the idea of like having a flexible self concept so that you can adapt to the situation for, whatever it's needed at the moment.
Hmm.
And then the last one is do what matters. So that's one, knowing your values, knowing what, principles you ideally want to live your life by, and then taking committed action that are in line with those values. And that all forms this sort of like triangle of stay present, open up, and do what matters. And all of that goes into sort of the center of the triangle, which is the idea of psychological flexibility. So it's
Mhm.
all about being able to use all of those different techniques to essentially commit to your values, do the things that you know you want to do, even if they're scary, stay in the present moment to be able to see your thoughts and emotions for what they are and to be able to defuse from them and accept scary experiences and show your brain that there's nothing to be afraid of and become less anxious over time. Right. So that definitely has echoes of ERP in it for sure.
Yeah.
And I just think it goes a step beyond a little bit because it's not just about like that one domain. It's about then saying, okay, now that I can do scary things, right? Not just within this one trigger of my OCD theme, I'm actually going to apply that to all of my life, right? Like there's a million things that are scary that you
Yeah.
know you want to be doing, but you're trying to avoid because they bring up, distressing thoughts. So,
Mhm.
how can you develop these tools and these skills? They're called like unhooking skills to not be so hooked by these thoughts and emotions so that you can just do what you want, take that committed action, and actually live by your values. And that ultimately, like, you might not be happy every day. No one is. You can't control your happiness every day, but you can live a fulfilling life by doing all of those things. So act
Wow.
is the way. I want to like shout it. I know I'm like so annoying about it on social media. I post about it constantly, but it's just so yeah, it really is, I think, like a very all-encompassing framework and something that's
Yeah.
also really approachable and easy to understand too.
Well, you're the reason why I even came across that because I haven't really, I'm still very new to a lot of these things. Like, I'm somebody who I'm 30 years old. I've been in talk therapy since I was 10. And then I had the realization that I was like, oh shit, this is not working for OCD. Like, talk therapy can be
Mm-hmm.
very good for other aspects of life, but then when you take that and you're like, okay, but yet my life is still run by my OCD, by the way that I've
Mm-hmm.
been thinking for so long, you have to go further. So I'm still new into understanding these concepts, and so I saw ACT on your profile multiple times, and I was like, we have to talk about it. um
Yeah.
a couple things come to mind. First, are you able to do something like ACT in conjunction with ERP? Is that something that people talk about at all?
Absolutely. So that's what I did for my therapy. It was a combination of ACT and ERP where I was using ACT skills of like what I was talking about with staying
Mm-hmm.
present and opening up to your experiencing and defusing from your thoughts and unhooking while also intentionally doing things that are, triggering to you.
Gotcha.
So absolutely, they can totally, and like exposure is an element of ACT for sure. But you could absolutely do like a more focused exposure. Actually, literally just finished a book a few days ago called Act Informed Exposure.
Oh wow.
So
Good
yeah,
timing.
you definitely can. The only
Yeah.
difference I will say, the biggest difference I should say, is I think ERP focuses a little bit more on symptom reduction whereas
Mm-hmm.
ACT focuses on psychological flexibility. So ACT focuses on like willingness, like even if you
Mm-hmm.
still feel anxious, you're still doing it and you're still accepting it. Versus, I think ERP is a little bit more focused on like how much has my anxiety gone down, how much have I habituated, or if you're more into the inhibitory learning model, like how much have I learned. Whereas ACT
Yes.
is really more about like even if these things still are scary, I can do them. However, most of the time they become less scary, right? It's very like
Yeah.
taboo and ACT to be like, I'm doing this to become less anxious, but like that's gonna
Yeah.
be a side effect. Like it
Yeah. Yeah.
is.
Well, that's so interesting. I'm thinking to myself, like, why don't we teach? Why aren't these concepts in school instead of like, oh, this is a trapezoid, or this is
Bro.
like, what are we doing? Because
What the fuck?
like I could have like here we are like let's talk about this. The fact that you're a millennial, right? I'm a millennial.
Yep.
Gen Z's
Sure.
below us. Like, we were in school for so long, like the things that we really needed to know, the things that we really needed to that we could use now are things like how to make decisions, what your values are, how to treat yourself,
Mm-hmm.
when you're having an episode. Like, these are things that we're
Mm-hmm.
having to like learn on our own or learn with a professional. and
Yeah.
and I'm just like, it's just like mind boggling to me to hear you talk about these concepts that I would have been like that I could have used that as a 12-year-old. You know what I mean?
Same.
Um,
Yeah.
it's wild.
Hmm.
And for when, like, let's just say, you were talking about values. For someone who's listening to this for the first time, maybe this is the first episode they've come across, like, how would you describe like values to someone? Because they would be like, well, what do I value, and how do you bring that into your like everyday experience? Because personally, I do a lot of avoidance things where it's like, I just don't want to sit down and do this job right now because I know I'm not going to be perfect at it and I don't have the energy to be perfect. So I'm going to go grab a coffee. And it's like,
Hmm.
is there a way to bring in values there in a situation like that versus like, oh, what are my values when it comes to like, going to a social event that I really want to go to, but I don't want to shake hands with anybody. So like the
Yeah.
different, you know what I mean? Like, so like
Yeah.
values at its basic form, how would you talk about that?
Yeah. So I think at its basic form, I'll talk about a couple of things. I think at its
Mhm.
basic form is the principles that you want to use to guide your life, that you ideally would use to guide your life. So, like, let's say you do something that you don't want to do. Okay, like exercising is a great example. Most
Mhm.
of us, like, for the most part, don't want to exercise. Like, or
Right.
maybe you do, but like, even if you do or you don't, when you do it, you feel amazing after, right?
Yes.
Because for most of us, being healthy and taking care of our bodies is aligned with our values, right? So it's like that fulfillment feeling. It's really anything that is personal to you that you feel like would bring you a sense of satisfaction upon doing it. So
Mhm.
it's like kind of picturing the way that it's stated in ACT a lot is there's a couple ways. One is like, imagine you're dead. Like, what would you want people to say at your funeral? Which I think is like a little
Yeah.
morbid. The one that I
Yeah.
use is like, let's say it's like your 95th birthday
Mhm.
and you're lucky enough to still be living, and there's all these people at your birthday party, and someone, maybe they're like making a documentary about you or something, and the person asks, like, how would you describe this person, like what matters most to her, and how has she reflected that in her life. And that's really like a good way to start thinking about values, right? So for me, as an example, I would want people to say connection,
Mhm.
like really someone that wanted to connect with other people. I would want someone to say compassion, like was someone that saw, you know, the common humanity in all of us. Adventurous, like always kind of like looking to do things in life that, push me forward and make me grow. Um, you know, Focused on like self care. So someone
Mhm.
that, always was put themselves first in a way that allowed them to help other people. Like all of those types of things are your values. And they really inform the way I look at it is like exactly like you were saying, right? Like I'm going to go get a cup of coffee to avoid this thing.
Mhm.
Like in that moment, you could say, okay, in 20 minutes, what would I rather have done? Like truly, what would I rather have done that would make me feel like I was being the person I truly wanted to be and showing up the way I truly want to show up? And that's kind of how you can think about values. I hope that's helpful. It is kind of like a confusing
Absolutely.
concept. I think the way, like, values is kind of like a hard word sometimes. I think the way that I can describe it to people more easily is just like what matters to you. Like
Yeah.
how do you want to show up to the world? I think that's a good
Yeah.
way to put it. Like on a day-to-day basis, how do you ideally want to show up to the world so that you can go to bed satisfied?
I love that. So you know what? Hey, some people might want to show up to the world as a Starbucks connoisseur, and they want to,
100%.
have a, if you want to be the Starbucks drinker, then leave your desk and go buy Starbucks. But I
And
think
that's
it's
the cool
easy.
thing. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the cool thing about values is like they're unique. Sorry for interrupting. I was just going to say they're unique
No.
to each person. Like they are
Yeah.
not universal. And that's something with Act Two that it talks about all the time. No thoughts are inherently good or bad. It's do
Hmm.
they align with your values, right? Are they aligned with the way that you want to show up in the world? And like as an act therapist, you never say like, "Oh, that's not a good thought," or "Oh, that is a good thought." Like, great thought, good job. You say like, "Well, what do you
Yeah.
think? Is that aligned with your values?"
Hmm. I love that because we talk about, in OCD, the reassurance seeking, and also always looking for that validation from an external source. And it sounds like even with what you just said, what do you think? Maybe
Hmm.
not kind of mentality with
Yeah.
ERP, like not really stopping the reassurance in its tracks. It sounds like that can be super beneficial for somebody who's kind of stuck in that cycle of trying to
Oh,
find
yeah.
validation and reassurance all the time. So it's so interesting. I know so very little about it, and I need to dive in deeper and to really understand this. Um, because to your point, you said this earlier about how you think this could be universally learned and this could help you no matter who you are. And you don't have to have OCD to be an anxious
Hmm.
person, right? Like
Correct.
I come from a long uh list of family members who are anxious as fuck, and I got all of
Same.
that plus plus the OCD on top of it. So
Same.
I understand it all too well. And I think
Yep.
like even they, and ERP too, right? Like you don't have to just have OCD to have avoidant behaviors, right?
Hmm.
So just these tools in general can be used to help anybody who's really struggling to live a life that is based on their values and to confront the things that they may not feel they have the confidence to do, but they
Right.
actually do have, right? So that's a really important theme that I think that I want to make sure people listening to this take that in and understand that, because you don't have to
Yeah.
have OCD to get tools with working with anxiety in general.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
100%. Yeah.
when I was like, I have told my story on the podcast prior, but I was diagnosed at 10 with OCD, and throughout my whole teens, I thought OCD and they called it separation anxiety at the
Hmm.
time. And throughout my teens, I thought it was the same thing, like just cleanliness and neatness. And when I was 19, I just lost it. Like I had a nervous breakdown, and I the the intrusive thoughts. I had harm OCD at the time, and I went to my physician and I was telling him all these thoughts, and I had kind of the same mentality where I was like, what do I have to lose? This guy's probably going to throw me into either a cop car or throw me into a hospital bed, and I'm fucked. So I'm just
Yeah.
going to tell him what's happening because I have no quality of life right now. And
Yep.
I told him, and he says, well, you do have OCD. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, this is OCD. And I said, I thought OCD was just like cleaning and stuff. He was like, no, like you're having intrusive thoughts and you're acting out compulsions to negate those feelings. And like just to your point, it was like before and after. It was like, oh my
Yep.
gosh, like you just labeled this for me. How do we
Hmm.
treat it? And that's when I got on paroxetine, Paxil. Um, and so the education behind it, being able to label something and then treating it, because OCD is super treatable.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people may be afraid to even get to that step to go and get checked out, or to talk to somebody because it's so much taboo around it. But I think even if you're not sure, if you just think that you have anxiety,
Yeah.
do you think that there's and we know the differences between just having GAD and OCD, but there are like some overlapping things. Do you think that
Hmm.
people are do you think that people it's one thing to go to a therapist and a doctor to get diagnosed, but I've learned so much about my journey through social media, and I know that can be
Hmm.
dangerous, but like just the connection in general, being able to talk to people such as yourself, people who have lived experience, and being like, oh my gosh, I get it, you get it.
Yeah. Yep.
um that's like, I think that's changing the game for a lot of people, because they may be able to have the confidence to go into a doctor's office and say, hey, I've been kind of looking this through and talking to people, and I think I might have this.
Yeah.
Can we dive in? Do you
Yeah.
feel like that's a goal of yours, with the page, OCD or just me? Do you think that that's a goal for you, to be able to help people recognize it in themselves and then be able to talk about it or go to a therapist? Like, what are your goals for actually advocating?
Yeah, totally. So I have a bit of a controversial opinion on GAD versus OCD that some
Sure.
people do not like, but that's fine. Like you said, I'm authentic. I
Yeah.
personally feel like the difference between GAD and OCD does not matter. Like
Okay.
I have looked at the DSM-5 and literally like looked at OCD and then looked at GAD, and I have not been able to come up with a functional difference. There's differences as far as like I think GAD is more of like this like ongoing storm of anxiety, right? Sometimes it's like tends to be about more realistic things, but not always. And then
Hmm.
OCD is, more of like a specific trigger and a specific compulsion. And it's usually not as rational, but that's not true. Like mine was completely rational. Like I did experience disassociation. Like that was
Sure.
real.
Yeah.
So I just think there's a couple things. One, I think there really is not a functional difference, and
Hmm.
I don't have like the sources on me now, but there's a really great podcast by Jenna Overbaugh that is about this, and she actually reached out to a bunch of OCD therapists to get their thoughts on this. And the
Hmm.
prevailing, like, overarching sort of viewpoint on it was no, there really isn't a difference, and they
Wow.
shouldn't. The key point is they shouldn't be treated differently. And that is so important to me because if I was someone that was diagnosed with GAD and then the best practice treatment concept for that was ERP or even ACT, I could have gotten help 16 years earlier. Like,
Wow.
I just feel like if we can see them, they don't have to be the same thing, right? Like, they can be on a spectrum. And I'm sure there's different ways to like approach that from a treatment perspective.
Hmm.
And I'm not a therapist. Like, I am not schooled in this. Like, I don't, I'm not trying to say like this is the end all be all.
Sure.
It's just what I've observed from what I have learned, both through my lived experience of being diagnosed with GAD and then having a 16-year lapse until I was diagnosed with OCD. Um, and I know that's extremely common for many people that
Yes.
if they were seen as more of a spectrum and if the OCD treatment concepts like ERP and ACT were more applied to things that are more seen in the GAD world rather than just like sticking people into talk therapy, which can often be harmful. You're ruminating more, you're reassurance seeking, you're rationalizing
Yep.
away these thoughts, all those things.
Hmm.
Then I do genuinely think that more people can be helped. And like, if at the end of the day, that is the outcome, like who cares? And I
Right.
know that there's people that want it to be like, we're OCD and like, this is our community and like everybody else get away. And like, I get that. I get wanting to have that community. But that's really why I also try to speak to an audience that is beyond just people that suffer from OCD, because I
Yeah.
want these treatment concepts to be applied to people beyond just, obsessive compulsive disorder, like
Right.
diagnosed, because they're powerful and they work, and not just for people that have diagnosed OCD. So that's my hot take. I might get some hate for it. It's just I don't people don't care about me enough to have haters, but you know what I mean. Like it's a hot take, I think, for sure.
You know what? It's I see the validity in that because at the end of the day, what are we looking for? We're looking for a quality of life and we're looking to feel better. And if you can
Yeah,
treat GAD with ACT, if you can treat GAD with ERP, and that's getting people to a place where they feel like they can live their life again, what's wrong with that, so,
yeah,
and I'm not a therapist either, I couldn't tell you, but as somebody who's listening to your point, someone who's also getting involved in this community more and learning to hear different sides and different stories, um at the end of the day, people just want to feel better and they want to feel
yeah,
okay in a healthy way and get the right help. And so I think if we can, especially that podcast you said, Jenna Overbaugh, like, if you, I'm sorry, did I say her name right?
yeah. You did.
Okay. If you can even talk to, no, she's talking to professionals, therapists in the community, and they're all kind of coming to the same consensus where it's like, well, it really is more like a spectrum rather than a black and white thing.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, OCD, like, I feel like it may present itself on a spectrum as well. Like there are times where
Oh
like
yeah.
I was really, really bad and then there's times where like the undercurrent's just there, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
and I'm sure it's the same for other people, where some people like can't leave the house, other people are like just barely surviving, and other people are living,
Yeah.
but like they're performing compulsions left and right. So,
Yeah.
um, I think that I'm really, thankful that you shared your opinion on that, and also your hot take. I'm sure we'll be able to share that on TikTok. But it shows what I'm looking to, the point I'm trying to get at is it shows that you're someone who's advocating for people to feel better, and you're showing people that whether you have OCD, you know, generalized anxiety disorder, whatever it is that you're having in that realm of fear is stopping you from living the life that you want to live. You just want to feel better, and there are tools to use to feel better. So
100%.
that's kind of where I see like your messaging.
Yeah, I could not. I think you summed it up so well. The only thing that I would adjust slightly is ACT talks about this a lot. It's not about feeling better, it's about acting
Mhm.
better. And 99.9% of the time, again, this is like ACT taboo to say, like, you will feel better. But like the action is what creates the outcomes, right?
Mhm.
And the outcomes that you have from acting differently will be positive, whether that means that you're immediately feeling less anxious, immediately feeling better, or just feeling like you're living in a more fulfilling way that, maybe eventually leads to better outcomes. The acting better versus feeling better piece, I do feel is important because
Mhm.
not only is it a distinction where, you can't really control how you feel ultimately. You can control how you react to it. You control your actions around it, but you can't really control how you feel. Whereas actions are entirely within your control, right? So it also gives you like, it gives you the power back, and it allows you to take the power back and empowers you to be the one that is really pushing for the outcomes that you want in your life. Because, again, actions and acting on your values or not is very much within your control, regardless of how you're feeling.
I love that. Like I love how you said that. It's not about feeling better, it's about acting better, and that has a lot to do with our choices, right? It has a
Yep.
lot to do with the way that we choose our day-to-day acts. It could be small, it could be big, but it has to do with the choices, and that's in our control, which
Yep.
inevitably change how you feel over time, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Um I want to segue a little bit and ask you a little bit about starting OCD or Just Me. You got catapulted into oblivion in 2022. Um,
Yep.
and when you have that change, when something affects you that much and it changes the course of your life, it's hard not to talk about it. It's hard not to advocate for it. And I'm wondering, like, was that itself the catalyst for you to start that page, or did you kind of slowly get into it? Was it scary for you at first? Tell me about that process for you.
Yeah, it's really funny, like now seeing myself as like, I don't know, like a social media advocate. Like I never expected that this is what was going to come from this. I basically
Hmm.
was like, you know what? I am someone that when I become into a topic, I go deep, deep down the rabbit hole. And I had just felt like there was so much I was learning that I felt like it was valuable to share. Again, not only from the perspective of OCD awareness, but also these other concepts too. And I was like, well, why not? Like, let's just like see how it goes. So this was November of 2023. So I had had my OCD diagnosis now for a year. When I had started the page, I'd had my OCD diagnosis for a year, and I was just like kind of testing out the waters. There was definitely a part of me that was like, maybe this is something that I could do, where I could develop more of a presence and then maybe write books about OCD or try to help people. But I never like thought it would be like anything really.
Yeah.
And yeah, I, just started posting every day, Monday through Friday. I started posting, and definitely things have evolved. Like I was saying, I think I kind of started out a little bit more focused on OCD awareness specifically. And then as I
Hmm.
sort of continued to learn more and just was in the space more, I realized there was maybe a little bit of a gap around just learning about how the treatment concepts can help, the day to day person. And so I've really kind of evolved into that and that being my focus. But yeah, it was just kind of like this is something I'm passionate about. So like, why not? And I'm talking about it on my personal page constantly. So like, why not just like stop annoying everyone on my personal page and like make a dedicated page for it and go from there. But yeah, since then I've been able to like develop a course that really everything I've talked about on this podcast is just like synthesized in this course. Again, very much not marketed for people with like, this will treat your OCD. I'm not saying you should do this instead of
Sure.
therapy. It's like very much meant to like boost results, kickstart things, you know, for people
Hmm.
that might be on hold with a therapist or haven't been able to find one and they just kind of want to like kickstart results and get these
Yeah.
kind of like concepts. It's basically just taking everything I've learned and like putting it into a 4-day course.
Wow.
And I'm also writing a book called OCD Exposed 10 Myths and Misconceptions about Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. So just like having a platform, obviously, it helps for those things to be seen by more people. And that's really
Yeah.
important. That's something that I am very grateful for. So, particularly the last one, I'm super pumped because, and you're a part of this, I've been reaching out to people in the OCD community to get like quotes and kind of share their stories around how these myths, these 10 myths have, which we've already talked about like multiple of them without
Yeah.
even knowing it, have impacted their lives personally. And I'm just amazed by the consistency in the stories of like, I first had OCD symptoms when I was 5 and I didn't get diagnosed
Yeah.
until I was 30. You know, for me, like
Yeah.
that was the case. Like I know for you, it took a while too.
Hmm.
Like it's just, it's becoming, which is kind of like what I think is so powerful about being in a community like this. It's becoming a book about our stories. And I would have never been able to write a book like that if I hadn't started this Instagram. So, yeah, I'm super
I
excited
think
for it.
that's
And yeah, it's exciting.
that's incredible. I'm so excited for you, one, and two, to be a part of it. And hopefully, these responses can continue to bring value to other people who read it too, because OCD is so, it can feel so isolating. And
Yes.
out there in the world, they don't even know it. They don't even know, most people don't really understand what OCD is. And I get questions all the time from people who call me, who text me, message me, and they'll be like, "Hey, I've been doing this. Is that OCD?" Like, I'm not really
Mm-hmm.
like neat or anything. And I'm like, you don't need to be neat to have OCD. Like, this is not the way it works, and I'm not a therapist. I never diagnose anybody, but I do kind of point them
Of
in the right
course.
direction, and I think a lot of people may find some realizations within themselves by turning to a book like yours, where they can look at the myths and say, hang on, like, I've heard of this before, I've contributed to this, myself included, I've contributed to the myth of OCD as a cleanliness thing, because that's all I knew until I was 19 years old. So
Yep.
that's going to be so powerful. I'm so glad that you're writing that, and
Thank
I hope
you.
people can follow along too. As you share updates about it on your
Yeah.
page. Your handle is ocd.or.justme.
Just me. Yeah. Yep. It's like
Okay.
OCD or just me with dots in between. I actually
Mhm.
just shared my book cover this morning on my stories. So I just finalized that. So to be honest, I
So
have no
exciting.
idea when it's coming out because I've never written a book before and I don't know how long it's going to take. We'll
Yeah.
see. It could be a
That's the
couple of
beauty
months,
of it.
could be 6 months, could be a year, no idea.
Yeah,
But I just
that's the
want
beauty
to
of it.
make sure that it's, yeah, and I just want to make sure that it's really well represented. There's like so many studies that I've been reading and things like that. Like I'm really trying to include a lot of statistics along with the stories. And it's just
Mhm.
incredible like how much these statistics like back up, everything that we now know, as people that are going through OCD of just like, it's not just physical, it's not just
Mhm.
cleaning, it's not just symmetry. Like, it's not that you really want these things, right? Like it completely goes against your values, but like that's, not something that even some doctors know. Like just so many things that I think
Mhm.
like I'm learning about too as I go through this process. So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
super excited to share it and I hope that it doesn't suck. I'm going to try my hardest.
I think
I'm
it's going to
really
be great.
trying. I'm not a
I think it's
writer.
going
I
to
mean,
be
I like
great.
writing, but I've never written a book before, so I'm trying.
well, the good thing is you have people in this community who love what you're doing. You have people in this community that you
Thank you.
trust, and just keep that door open and share it with your trusted people. And I'm sure that they'll be 100% behind you in making sure that it's the
Thank
best that it
you.
can be. So I'm excited
Thank
about
you.
it, and Elysse, thank you so much. Is there anything that you
Thank
would like to
you.
leave here on the podcast before we leave?
Yeah, the last thing is just if anyone was like, kind of interested in what we were talking about with like ACT and kind of like the ERP elements of it, like I was saying, I do have that course. It's called How to Stop the Anxiety Struggle. Very much, again, not meant for just like people that are suffering from OCD, but just anyone who feels like they're anxious and wants to live a better life and really take back control of, their lives and their actions. So you can find that on my page. And yeah, just be on the lookout for more fun stuff coming up. I'm actually doing coaching training to become a certified life coach and get ICF accredited, which is like the International Coaching Federation. And then also working towards my national, what is it called? National Board Certified Health and Wellness Coach certification as well. So working on that. Really want to
Wow.
feel like I have credentials to be able to help people. I don't just want to be a random person trying to, help people. I want to be credentialed and feel like I have like a standing and a backing behind me in a certification. So, yeah, exciting
Incredible.
stuff coming up for sure. Thank you.
And I'll
It was
include
so good to
that.
talk to you.
Likewise. And now I'll include those links in the show notes as well for people to check them out.
Amazing.
Elysse, thank you so much. And we'll be talking soon. And I'm so excited for you in the book.
Thank you, Tyler. This was awesome.